I woke up earlier than usual that morning, feeling a strange restlessness I couldn't quite place. The sunlight streamed through the blinds, painting streaks of gold across the bedroom walls. For a moment, I lay there, listening to the rhythmic hum of the ceiling fan, trying to shake off the unease gnawing at the edge of my thoughts. I had no reason to feel this way, or so I thought. Life had been pretty routine lately. My wife, Emily, and I had been married for 7 years. We had our ups and downs, sure, but who didn't? We lived in a modest house in the suburbs, with a dog named Max and a well-tended garden out back. Things were comfortable. But as I'd learned over the years, comfort could sometimes mask the truth. Emily had left for work early that day, or at least that's what she'd said. She kissed me on the forehead as I feigned sleep, her perfume lingering long after she closed the door behind her. I had the day off, so I planned to tackle some overdue chores, maybe even catch up on a book I'd been meaning to read. It was around noon when I decided to take Max for a walk. As we strolled through the neighborhood, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I chalked it up to paranoia or maybe just an overactive imagination. When we returned, I fed Max and made myself a sandwich. I tried to focus on a documentary playing on TV, but my thoughts kept drifting. By mid-afternoon, I noticed Emily hadn't called or texted me, which was unusual. She was the type to check in, even if just to ask how Max was doing. I grabbed my phone and shot her a quick message. Hey, how's your day going? The 3 dots appeared almost immediately, signaling her reply, Emily, busy, but good. How about you? I stared at the screen, her response feeling oddly detached. Shaking my head, I typed back, just hanging out. Miss you. She didn't reply. I decided to distract myself by cleaning the house. As I vacuumed the living room, something caught my eye, a pair of men's sunglasses on the coffee table. They weren't mine. My heart skipped a beat, but I quickly rationalized it. Maybe they belonged to one of Emily's friends from her book club, or perhaps she'd borrowed them from someone at work. Still, a seed of doubt had been planted. Around 5 p.m., I heard the front door open. Emily's voice carried through the house as she greeted Max. I stepped into the hallway, forcing a smile. Hey, how was work? I asked. She hesitated for a fraction of a second before replying, busy, as usual. Her tone was light, but something about her demeanor felt strained. She avoided my gaze, heading straight to the kitchen to pour herself a glass of water. I decided not to press her. Maybe she'd had a tough day. The evening passed uneventfully. We had dinner together, exchanged small talk, and watched a sitcom before heading to bed. But as I lay there beside her, staring at the ceiling, my mind kept circling back to those sunglasses. The next morning, Emily mentioned she had a meeting in the city and would be gone for most of the day. She left around 8 a.m., her car disappearing down the street as I stood at the window. Once she was gone, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. I decided to do something I'd never done before. I checked her phone records. It took me a while to figure out her password, but eventually, I was in. What I found made my stomach drop. There were dozens of calls and texts to a number I didn't recognize, all at odd hours. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the messages. Most of them were innocuous enough, but some were undeniably intimate. I sat there, my heart pounding, as the reality of the situation began to sink in. Emily was having an affair. For a moment, I considered confronting her right then and there, but I needed proof. Solid proof. So, I decided to follow her. She left again the next morning, dressed more carefully than usual. Her outfit was subtle but elegant, and she'd spent extra time on her makeup. I waited until she was out of sight before grabbing my car keys and trailing her at a safe distance. My palms were sweaty, and my heart raced as I tried to keep my breathing steady. She drove across town, eventually pulling into the parking lot of a boutique hotel. My chest tightened as I watched her get out of the car, glancing around before heading inside. A man followed shortly after, someone I didn't recognize. He was tall, well-dressed, and carried himself with a casual confidence that made my blood boil. I waited for what felt like an eternity before deciding to go inside. My hands were trembling as I approached the front desk, asking for directions to the hotel bar. I didn't have a plan, just a growing rage and a need for answers. As I reached the second floor, I heard voices coming from one of the rooms. The door was slightly ajar. My heart hammered in my chest as I pushed it open, the sight before me confirming my worst fears. There they were, Emily and the stranger, tangled in each other's arms, oblivious to my presence. The room spun as a wave of anger and betrayal crashed over me. I didn't know what to say or do, so I simply stood there, staring. Emily was the first to notice me. Her eyes widened in shock as she pulled away from the man, scrambling to cover herself with the sheets. "Michael," she stammered, her voice trembling. I can explain." But there was no explanation that could erase what I'd just witnessed. The next few moments were a blur. I don't remember what I said or how I left the room, but I found myself back in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My mind raced with 1,000 questions, each one more painful than the last. How long had this been going on? Who was that man? And why had she betrayed me? When I finally got home, the house felt cold and empty. Max wagged his tail, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. I sank onto the couch, burying my face in my hands as the weight of it all came crashing down. Emily came home later that evening, her face pale and her eyes red from crying. She tried to explain, to apologize, but I couldn't bring myself to listen. The trust we'd built over 7 years had been shattered in an instant, and I didn't know if it could ever be repaired. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. I moved into the guest room, avoiding Emily as much as possible. Friends and family noticed something was wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to tell them. The pain was too fresh, too raw. Eventually, Emily and I sat down to talk. She admitted to the affair, saying it had been a mistake, a moment of weakness. She begged for forgiveness, promising to do whatever it took to rebuild our relationship. But could I ever trust her again? As I write this, I'm still grappling with that question. Part of me wants to believe her, to give her a second chance. But another part of me wonders if some wounds are too deep to heal. Only time will tell.